can tell you not to sing your story? Who all can tell you that you're singing off key? You are the dancer, you are not the dancer. You are the song, not the one who sang. Be a beautiful songbird. No, you tell the truth. You tell the truth.
Welcome, everyone. I have a question for you. Have you ever stopped to notice that when we humans talk about nature, we kind of see ourselves as disconnected from it, as though we see nature as being outside of us? It's in the forest, it's in the wildlife, it's in the mountains and beaches. But think about it for a moment. Do you see yourself as a part of nature? And my guest today is going to be talking to us about it. I believe that he shares my philosophy in this, that perhaps the key to our own personal thriving in all dimensions of life is intimately intertwined with planetary thriving, and that it is about reconnecting with nature and coming back to our natural state as beings of nature. So my guest today, I want to introduce you to him, is Andres Edwards. I can't say his name. I was telling him as a Latina, I can't say his name in any other way other than Andres. So Andres Edwards is an educator, an award-winning author, a media designer, presenter, and sustainability consultant. He is the founder and president of EduTracks, a firm specializing in developing education programs and consulting services on sustainable practices for green building and business projects. His work includes developing energy management and sustainability plans, as well as training and awareness programs for municipalities, colleges, and property managers. Andres is the author of the award-winning books on sustainability, The Heart of Sustainability, and Thriving Beyond Sustainability. And his new book is Renewal: How Nature Awakens Our Creativity, Compassion, and Joy. Andres, welcome to Thrive with Morella.
Thanks, Morella. Great to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. So, as I told you before the show, I like to start, whenever I don't lose track of my plan, I always like to start by asking my guests, what is one of your personal keys to thriving in life?
It's two of the things that bring me joy and help to rejuvenate me, and it is being in nature. It's doing yoga, it's going for walks, it's reading, it's listening to music. It's all these things that I know that bring me joy and help to rejuvenate me.
And question about yoga and nature. Do you ever do yoga out in nature?
I have, and certain workshops I have done. I remember doing yoga on the beach one time. I've also done it in meadows and outside. Yes, I do. Normally I end up going to a studio, but sometimes I do go outside. It's different and it's fun.
It is different and fun. And as a fellow yogi nature lover, I have a question for you. Do you use, what's your preference, mat or no mat when doing yoga on the earth? Yoga mat.
Can you say that again, because I missed the audio a little bit.
Oh, okay. So the question is, as a yogi who also loves nature, I have a thought on doing yoga out on the beach, out on a lawn, and I've always found it strange to lay my yoga mat, which is like rubber, although you can find it made from natural materials, but I've always found it made from natural materials, but a mat on the surface of the earth. If I'm doing yoga out in nature, I just feel compelled to be in direct contact with nature. So what's your preference if you're out in nature and you're connecting with nature?
Oh. Yeah.
So you use a yoga mat. I mean, everybody does.
Yeah.
I think I'm the only bizarre one that I'm like, no. I want to have my feet on the earth.
It makes sense, especially if you're on the beach or on the sand. It totally makes sense to do some of the poses just right on the earth. So no, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Normally, if it's in a lawn kind of place or outdoors, everyone puts their mat out, but I could totally see not doing that and feeling more connected. I forget where I was reading this about the importance of when you do walk on the earth to experiment as part of connecting with nature, to take your shoes off and take your socks off and actually feel the earth under your feet. You know, it's the classic one is when you're out on the beach,
Right.
and you want to take your shoes off and you want to walk in the moist sand. That's like the obvious.
Right. Oh, your
But
phrase.
it's, you know, it's like it is.
You just froze a little bit for me, but I think we'll. It's only happened once since you. So I think we'll be fine. Okay, so before we dive in, because I have so many questions, so many things I want to talk to you about your book. But as I was sharing at the beginning as the introduction of the show, an underlying premise for this show that's called Thrive with Morella is that, I think we're in agreement that personal thriving goes hand in hand with planetary thriving. You cannot have personal or human thriving if there isn't planetary thriving, that they go hand in hand. And that's what I kind of got from your book. But I was curious as to your motivation, your drive for writing this book, Renewal.
Yeah. Well, my previous books deal with sustainability, and I sort of trace the whole sustainability movement from the principles, the values, to the groups and the institutions and the individuals who are making a difference in that movement. And then the final book on sustainability was the heart of sustainability, which was the personal side. Mm-hmm. But the seedbed for all these books is nature. And it dawned on me that we need to talk about the fundamental connection to nature and why that's so integral for us to thrive and for the planet to thrive.
Yeah, and that somehow humanity has become disconnected from nature, that we don't, and I'm curious as to why you think that is, because I remember being startled. It was actually on a vision quest. Oh my God, it's almost 10 years ago, that I was out in the woods in the forests of Vermont, and I realized how profoundly I felt out of place. And it was a huge transformational experience for me, because I realized, oh my God, I feel so divorced from nature, that I'm in this space that should be so natural, and I don't feel, I had that awakening. And I think that that's a big part of the problem in humanity. So I'm wondering, as this is your area of expertise, why do you think that we have become so divorced from our natural state of interconnectedness with nature?
Well, it's the trends. I mean, when we look at the fact that we spend most of our time indoors, over 90% of our time is indoors, then we look at screens most of the time, and we just don't get out so much. We also most of us live in urban centers and in busy cities, and the pace is really, really fast. I don't think it's a normal human pace, right, with the pace we're in now, the life pace. So when we get out in nature, it gives us an opportunity to begin to slow down, to begin to be more at a rhythm of what feels more natural for us. But on the day-to-day basis, with the driving and the stress and the jobs and the phones and the emails, everything ramps it up, mm-hmm, and it makes us separate. And it becomes really apparent when we take time out. So whether we get out and go on a camping trip for a few days, mm-hmm, or whether we just go out in a park and spend several hours without an agenda. And it doesn't mean you can't bring technology. I think if you bring an iPhone and you want to take photographs, or if you want to use it as an ID mechanism or something, that's okay. I don't see anything wrong with that. But the fundamental part of it is to be able to tune in to the other pace, the pace of nature, and make sure that we're tuned in with what our own rhythm is, mm-hmm, and then make that aligned with what's out there.
Right.
And there are things that disrupt that. A lot of people, a lot of noise, a lot of traffic will dampen it. Mm-hmm. But you can still hopefully find a park or a quiet place in our towns or near our homes where we can do that. And I say, the dosage might be 30 minutes every day for when we can, and mm-hmm, just make it happen. Maybe if it's 20 minutes, whatever it is, but just that break really, really helps.
Yeah. And so, I'm putting myself in the place of, our audience listening and watching this, that, if they're driving their car and they're hearing you say this, and they may like, well, that sounds nice. Maybe they commute 2 hours to work, and then, they're there all day, commute back home, got to make dinner, and that's, kind of unwind in front of the TV, and that's the reality for a lot of people. And so, kind of making that effort of finding a way to connect with nature and saying, how am I even going to find 15, minutes a day to go anywhere? They might need a little bit of motivation in terms of sharing with them some of the insights that you share in your book, and some of the things that you found in terms of what happens for us when we start to reconnect. And you touch on a variety of benefits, so can you talk to us about some of the benefits that you have found for yourself in your research and your work that might motivate people to say, this is something I really need to look into?
Yeah, I mean, we all talk about the benefits of exercise, and we all know the benefits of exercise, and most of us try and make some time to do that. So obviously, if you're outside walking, there's exercise. There's improved distance vision. It's reduced stress. It reduces the symptoms of ADHD, if that's an issue for you. There's so many. It's up. It makes you happy. These are all studies that are being done right now with groups out in nature, and it doesn't have to be 2 weeks in the wilderness. It can be 20 minutes in a local park. There's a term called forest bathing that they use in Japan.
Yes.
And in Korea. I talk about that a little bit in terms of, really measuring what is it about nature that helps people. And in Japan, in the cedar forests, and they see the aromatic smells, that the plants put out, and how that helps us to reduce stress. The stress hormone is reduced.
Yeah.
And also just the fact that maybe there's more oxygen. Some people think that just the fact that there's more oxygen in a forest helps us also feel more alive. So there's so many positive things physiologically. And then just the break from the routine, from the noise, from the urbanity is also very, very helpful in terms of our health.
Yeah. And I had never heard, you mentioned in your book, as you're talking about the foresting, kind of going that practice of just walking through the woods in Japan, you mentioned that the effects of the smells of the forest are equivalent to aromatherapy. And so a lot of people are spending a lot of money on aromatherapy, and that's great if they can't, get that benefit from anywhere else, but how fantastic to get it from the forest. And the other thing that stood out for me that you mentioned in terms of the science of it is you mentioned how it's proven to lower blood pressure and improve. There was one thing that was really startling, some research that you mentioned about how people have quicker surgery recovery in the hospital if they can see nature out of a window. So
yeah, they did studies. These studies go way back, where they had 2 windows, one where you're looking at a brick wall, the other one where you're looking at trees or nature, and the recovery rate is faster. The people needed less pain medication because they were recovering faster. So these are studies that are going on. And so in hospitals now, they're making a point in the new designs to make as much as possible promote views of nature. And it's not just hospitals. There's a whole field of biophilic design that I also talk about in terms of office space, right? And how that's really important now in terms of the natural light that comes into your office, having plants and vegetation, having water features. All these things are proving to be hugely beneficial in terms of productivity, in terms of people wanting to be in their offices, and not wanting to leave their jobs because it's pleasant. I tell the story when I was in San Francisco and I ended up in this annex that had no windows and was working in there, and I was just going crazy. Finally, the door wasn't working. We were able to get the door to work and get out, but it's such a difference to be in a place with absolutely no views, no natural light, and then be in a place that has views and sunlight. It's huge.
Yeah, huge. And so since you mention it, you mention in the book biophilic design, and it's towards the end of the book. And I'm wondering, precisely since we were just talking about the person who commutes, extensive amounts of time every day, perhaps some principles of this biophilic design is something that might help them if they can't get out into nature. What are some things that, can you talk a little bit more about biophilic design, and what are some things that maybe people can take away and perhaps start incorporating?
I mean, in office space, obviously you talk to the people that you work with and you do the basic things like putting plants in your workspace, like having there are these green walls that people are putting inside office spaces too. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be in a building with a green roof, that's a whole new movement that's happening in terms of having gardens on the roof of buildings. Then it's the color palettes. They've done studies. There's a hypothesis called the Savannah hypothesis that says that if you paint your interior walls with earth tones, the browns and the beiges and those colors, it has a positive effect in our moods and in our productivity. So how to pay attention to the color scheme that you have inside your office space, the plants, the water, the views, the natural sunlight, all these things. It's basically trying to meld the walls between the outside of the building and the inside of the building. That's one aspect of it. The other piece of it is human-centered design, which is how do we begin to design buildings so that they are more conducive to the way people behave in buildings. There's the classic story of the Pixar building here in the Bay Area when Steve Jobs was involved with that, and say, we're going to have bathrooms in only one location so that people have to walk further to them, because we know that when people walk further, and new ideas are going to have that. So just to think about how do we create cross-pollination of ideas.
You broke up a little bit. So when people walk further to the bathroom, what happens? This audio jumped a little bit.
You're going to run into more coworkers.
Of course, yes.
So you're going to have an opportunity to interact. Maybe new ideas, new projects may spawn from that.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a simple thing. But even at a college here in the Bay Area in Cupertino, there was a design, and I worked with the architect, where they built these alcoves outside of the classrooms, and you discovered that that's where most of the students like to hang out and talk to each other. That's a very simple design, but it really has a huge impact. And again, thinking about how do we behave in buildings and how do we promote the things that we want to promote in terms of interactions in buildings.
Right. Yeah.
So that's one part of it. Biophilia theory, which is our innate connection to nature. How do we promote that in our buildings and even in our homes? How do we get more plants in our homes, nicer views, have more natural lighting? All these things we know help us to thrive, help us to feel more connected, help us to feel more alive.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is that, it can be as simple as paint colors, There's a little bit of an interior design, and kind of an HGTV kind of trend of interior design going to lots of gray tones and white tones and black tones. And what you're saying is like actually replicating more of the nature tones, the greens, the blues. It can be as simple as that to help us gain a little bit of that kind of, I think it's, I think sometimes in terms of vibration, a color has a certain vibration, a spectrum, and that's a vibration that we may not necessarily be thinking of, but certainly we're picking that up. And so it can be as simple as that to start there, a plant, right? If you can get a window or...
Yeah, even the textures, the fact if you have more wood inside, the textures, the colors, all these things matter.
Right.
And it's just calls on us to pay attention to what feels right. If it's all glass and all metallic, does it feel okay or does it not? Well, if it doesn't, then let's switch it around and see what might feel more conducive to make us feel more at home while we're working.
Right. Yeah, you're talking, I'm remembering a workshop that I attended in Austin, Texas, about a year, maybe 2 years ago, and it was very trendy. It was this big kind of industrial kind of space, huge, super tall ceilings, all concrete, metal, and then long tables, wooden tables, and all these things, sayings, and written on the walls, but it was so industrial, and there was a large group of people. And I remember after 2 days of being in that space that I felt like I couldn't wait to get out of it, because it was just, it was beautiful and very trendy. Anyway, I don't want to take us off track, but kind of going deeper in a slightly different direction in terms of the impact on health. I was wondering if you could share with our audience a little bit of the difference for children between, the children that are now being studied, and there's this phenomenon that's being labeled, and I forgot to write who the author is of this, or who coined the term, nature deficit disorder. So
Richard Louv. Yeah.
Richard Louv. So the children, what is the impact or the difference between children who we're seeing as having nature deficit disorder versus, say, the children in Scandinavian countries who grow up with this thing that you mentioned the word, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, like friluftsliv, I don't know. But this idea of foresting, of like going, cultivating that time in, and please, tell us more about friluftsliv or friluftsliv, but the difference between the raising of our children in these radically different ways.
Well, the main difference that I found, Morella, in my readings and research is that whereas here in America, we think of, getting a break in grammar school or middle school and they go out to play in the yard as a little break from the studies and from the classroom, there it's really integrated in Scandinavia so that when the kids go out, it's part of their education is outdoors, and they have some outdoor schools that are all outdoors. So it's a way of looking at the class as the outdoors as the classroom. And partly because maybe the teaching system, they have more freedom to design their own curriculum and the teachers, how much time they spend outdoors. They've been able to develop a whole system where the kids are integrate themselves much more into the natural world than we do here in the US. And the studies have shown that they do exceedingly well in their standardized testing in Scandinavia and in those countries. And maybe there's a connection there, the fact that if they're outdoors, it's a more natural environment. They're able to explore. They're able to learn about the plants and the cosmos and everything they can learn outside. And it's a more seamless interaction between the classroom and the time that they spend outdoors. Yeah. And it's something that is being experimented on here in the U.S. There's some schools that sort of do more of that, but it's more the progressive programs that are doing that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Some of the so. The other piece also about the Scandinavian countries was that not only in education, but you also talk about how even adults just feel like, being in nature and, just having this expression. It's almost like, because it isn't necessarily about camping and it isn't necessarily about a particular activity, right? It's just this idea of just being in nature, that it's like, it's almost like vacationing. It's a concept. It sounds like they have this concept that is as embedded in their culture as it, as barbecues or taking a vacation might be for us. Is that kind of a fair interpretation of what you're sharing about?
Yeah, I think that, even in Scandinavia, it's not so much about being in the wilderness. It can be that, but it can also be just being in a cabin, being more connected to the outdoors. And so it's as if there's permeability between humans and nature, so that we understand that we're connected to the elements closely and that we're dependent on the life support systems of the planet. But it doesn't come from a cerebral point of view. It comes from here. It comes from a connection, feeling that we do feel better, we feel more alive, and we know that we are connected to what's out there. So let's make sure that we spend the time and we feel connected to place. There's also the whole notion of place and being connected to a place, and understanding that every place has its character. And the character comes from the physiology, from the geography, from the wildlife, but it also comes from the human history of the place. So how to really embrace that history of a particular place, whether it's our hometown or whether we like to go in the summers, whatever it is. So there's that way of being able to connect to the history and the character of the place that we feel close to.
Right. And you also talk about, and you made a mention of it just now about, kind of feeling it in your heart. You talk about the findings of how it's not just, being out there and not just getting out into a park and being on your phone, but actually cultivating the emotional connection. And you even talk about the differences in outcomes between, say, environmental, sustainability actions or problem solving for environmental problems that are just focusing on the problem versus when people take time to connect with the space or the animals on an emotional level, and that can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's some theories about what is it about being outdoors that makes us feel so alive, and when you look at the brain, there's a thing called the attention restoration theory, which is there's part of our brain when we're working on a problem that's really, really difficult, like a math problem or a mechanical problem, it really taxes our brain, and we can be drained from that because we're so laser focused on that problem. Mm-hmm. And yet, when we're out in nature, we're not focusing on solving a particular problem, but we're out enjoying the colors, enjoying the textures, enjoying the wind, enjoying the flowers. And that point, the brain has an opportunity to rest and to restore and to rejuvenate. So in that capacity, we feel really relaxed. And that's part of what neuroscientists are thinking about and doing studies on, to show that in that state, we are fully relaxed, and that may be part of why we feel so alive when we're in nature. The other piece of it is the biophilia that I referred to a little while ago, which is to say that, we have an innate connection to the natural world that goes back to our ancestors. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's really hard to sort of tap into and really point to, but we know that we all have it. And it goes back to our ancestors. It's a connection, an innate connection to all living organisms. And we are one of them. So it makes sense that we would feel connected to all of them. It's just that, as we talked earlier, we have just been separated from that because of all of technology, all the urbanity. So how do we bring that back? And Richard Lewov in Nature Deficit Disorder really started a whole national conversation on that, because he noticed how the amount of time that kids are spending outdoors, and also adults, but particularly kids he focused on, has been reduced. And luckily, there's a whole lot of programs now nationally that are trying to promote more spending time. And some people even think it's like a prescription, 30 minutes a day in nature for 30 days. That's your new prescription. And my goodness, it'll reduce your blood pressure. It'll give you all the benefits. And it's a whole lot cheaper than taking all these drugs. To take care of that.
Yes, a whole lot cheaper. And so we're gonna, in a couple of minutes, we're gonna say goodbye to our TV viewers, because our TV time stops sharply at the 30 minutes, and we can talk a little bit more for our radio guests and for podcast guests. But I want to show our TV viewers your book again. Your latest book is called Renewal: How Nature Awakens Our Creativity, Compassion, and Joy, and it's available online. And also for people who are curious about your work, and they can find more about you at your website, which is andresedwards.com. and they're seeing your name spelled also on the screen. So,
right.
And so in just a couple words for our TV viewers, what is like one or two quick, easy things that they can do to start to cultivate this kind of heart space with nature?
I think the first thing is to find out what motivates us individually.
What motivates us individually?
And then do that. So many ways. What motivates us what makes us feel alive? Just what you asked me, the very first question is what helps me thrive, is to tap into that and then find out how that we can do out in nature. So maybe it's photography, maybe it's painting, maybe it's exercise, maybe it's a social justice cause, maybe it's reading, journaling, whatever it is. Just start slowly, simple steps, and then let it grow from there in whichever way it wants to.
Yeah. And so I am going to ask you to share two things with us. One is, I want to tease our audience about it, because I want you to tell us the story about the relocation of the leopards in Mumbai. But before we get to that, I was wondering if you can read a paragraph from your book that I really liked on page 52. This is chapter 4, and I really liked this because, and it's the chapter For our audience, I'll tell you this chapter is called Mentor and Provider. So nature as our mentor and provider. And so I'm wondering if you can read that paragraph for us, the third one on page 52.
Sure. With 3.8 billion years of experience, nature has tried out many things, and the ones that have succeeded are the ones that are still around and have stood the test of time. So whether it's species of plants or animals,